Your next news update, 8:30. Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Stories like this continue to be sources of concern, and we've talked to Ken Cuccinelli at the Voter Integrity Project and others in terms of what the Trump campaign, in conjunction with the RNC, in conjunction with state parties, in conjunction with independent groups like Judicial Watch, litigating these issues are doing, but the concerns persist. Welfare offices, I should say, and other agencies in 49 states are providing voter registration forms to migrants without requiring proof of citizenship. So there's federal action to stop this distribution. We talked to Brian Stile about it, about what he is doing as a member of a relevant House committee. Every state but Arizona, which recently passed a law barring the practice on state but not federal forms. Interesting. State but not federal. Gives applicants for either welfare benefits, driver's licenses, or in some case mail-in ballots voter registration forms without demanding proof of citizenship. This is some of what Cleta Mitchell, to bring this up again, was talking about in her memo back in February about the loopholes in the National Voter Registration Act, as well as the legislation governing overseas voting that is of concern, particularly when you have more than 12 million illegal border crossers, including gotaways, since fiscal year 2021, 241,000 apprehensions of illegal border crossers in just May alone. It's a real concern, and we're seeing some legal action, good. But in terms of the organizing, the manpower, what the VBM programs, vote by mail programs look like, what the ballot integrity program looks like as it's coming into focus, and we're coming into crunch time, it's still a little bit blurry to me, and thus a concern should be for all who are interested in free and fair elections that you can have confidence in. For more on this and other topics, we're pleased to be joined by Amber Duke, the Spectator's Washington editor. She's also the author of The Snowflakes Revolt, How Woke Millennials Hijacked American Media. Amber, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So, take that topic from whatever angle you want, but the RNC and the Trump campaign bears primary responsibility for the sort of response to what is going on by both Democrats in government around the country.
That's right. And I think they're acutely aware of that. And they're also aware of the fact that they were not prepared for what was going to happen in 2020 in regards to the last-minute rule changes to the voting process in various swing states because of the pandemic, and also irregularities that popped up even after voting started. There was not a ground game in place to ensure that all of the reports that came in were being investigated, that there were lawyers properly trained available in order to assist people with these issues and to make sure that they were tackled early enough such that they weren't trying to retroactively months later adjudicate these claims. And so I talked to people at the RNC and people who work with the RNC for an article in the Spectator magazine out in their July edition. And what they told me is that they do have a program this time around filled with 100,000 volunteers and lawyers who are going to be available on Election Day. They have a hotline set up for people to report voting irregularities and potential fraud, and they are supposed to deploy with rapid response services. And in addition, they're also taking very seriously the mail voting program that the Democrats obviously did really well back in 2020 and 2022. They're encouraging Republicans not to wait until Election Day. They want them to bank their vote now, and have created an app called Vote Pro that allows people to register to vote, check their registration status, request a mail-in ballot, and then commit to vote in person on Election Day or via mail, which is extremely helpful when you're, of course, organizing grassroots campaign, because it helps you understand how many of your people have voted so far, kind of what the turnout's looking like, what the enthusiasm looks like, and maybe helps you figure out which areas you need to deploy more volunteers or more people to assist individuals in either registering to vote or actually getting to the polls, filling out a mail-in ballot, et cetera. So obviously time will tell if this is an effective program and if it's enough people, if they've put enough money into it. But I think it's at least heartening that they're doing something compared to 4 years ago when there was seemingly nothing.
And are they focusing mostly in the swing states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin?
That's my understanding. They actually just had an event for their voter integrity project in Pennsylvania. I believe it was just a couple of weeks ago, and they've had other ones in Nevada and other swing states. So this is something that, at least on a public front, it seems like they're taking very seriously. But again, with the recent leadership change over at the RNC, it's a lot of work and a lot of trust that voters have to put into them to recognize that they are not only dealing with trying to win an election and trying to win an election that could potentially be filled with irregularities again, but also having to basically rebuild the organization from the ground up.
Right. I mean, and again, I appreciate that there's a recognition and that you've got perhaps more seasoned pros in charge of the Trump campaign than you did last go around, and a little bit more focus on the fundamentals, the infrastructure building, the nuts and bolts of vote by mail and ballot integrity programs and personnel up front and litigation happening up front. But it still feels like a little bit like they're cramming for finals. And what I mean by that is, so I mentioned Brian Stile from Wisconsin and his House Administration Committee. You know, that Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act to require states to receive proof of citizenship when anyone registers to vote by mail at a DMV or welfare agency in response to what these agencies are doing. I mean, that's a bullet point for a mail piece, but that's not going anywhere between now and November. And it sounds like, it seems like it's sort of throwing that out there that we have a plan or we have legislation that we filed and the Dems bottled it up. And that's all well and good for that purpose. But I mean, if you were going to make this central to part of your messaging and really central to trying to create a bit of a chilling effect by on all of those skullduggerous operatives on the other side, I mean, this should have been done a long time ago. And so I just worry that it's still really trying to bootstrap a program that I understand will not get to, because we started so far behind, we're not get to what the Democrats already have in place, but closes the gap enough such that the incremental difference is not dispositive of the outcome.
Yeah, and I think that's a totally fair criticism. And if I can, play devil's advocate a little bit and try to defend the RNC, not because I necessarily think that they're worth defending, at least not from previous leadership, right, but just to provide the other perspective, because the RNC was not allowed to really engage in ballot security activities until after 2018. There was a federal court consent decree that effectively limited their ability to challenge voters' qualification and target election fraud for about 3 decades. So that was one of the reasons, in addition to them obviously not fully understanding how hard the Democrats were going to go in 2020. They only had about 2 years since the lifting of that decree where they could even get engaged in these projects. And in the meantime, the Democrats had, of course, dozens, if not hundreds, of liberal advocacy groups that were dedicated to encouraging people to vote in whichever way possible and basically skirt the rules however they possibly could. Of course, they were obsessed with ballot harvesting, and Republicans just didn't have a similar kind of operation for their voters. So we're now looking at 6 years later. Let's see what they put together. But certainly the fact that the RNC had its leadership change in March means that there is a limited amount of time to even get something of this magnitude off the ground. I do know Michael Watley, one of the new co-chairs. He was the North Carolina GOP chair before taking over the RNC and was apparently very proud of their voter integrity program there. Ted Budd ended up winning his Senate race in 2022, which was one of the rare, really good wins for Republicans in the 2022 midterms, which was supposed to be a red wave. So I think there's reason for optimism, but yeah, the timeline, you can't change that, right? And so that's obviously going to be a thorn in their side and a reason for people to be very, very concerned about what's happening in November.
Have you studied what the Democrats are doing to get the vote out and to register more people?
Well, I do know that they are not going to have duck bucks like they did in 2020,
That's a start.
which is a good sign, right? But of course, I mean, the liberal and progressive advocacy groups run deep, and they're going to continue to do what they have been doing probably for every election for the past 30 to 40 years. So I think you have to anticipate that, if anything, their ground game has only gotten even more sophisticated.
I mean, how big of a threat do you think illegal immigrants voting is? I mean, is there any sort of handle on what the exposure level could be?
That I don't know, but I mean, anything with illegal aliens is hard to quantify because we have obviously the separation between people who were processed at the border versus gotaways, versus there's a third category, which is people we don't even know about. I mean, I've heard people say that they believe there could be as many as 40 million illegal aliens in the country right now, not just under Biden, but in total, which is obviously a ridiculously high amount. And if even 10% of them are registering to vote in Democratic localities that allow them to vote in, let's say, city or statewide elections, and then they somehow get the ability to get a federal ballot because there's no process for checking someone's immigration status when they go to register to vote, then that could be a serious problem. I mean, a lot of states and localities allow illegal aliens to get driver's licenses now. And, if you go to the DMV and you get a driver's license or you renew your license, they ask you to check the box to register to vote at the same time or update your voter registration. There's, again, no difference between whether or not you're a citizen or whether you're an illegal alien. So, yeah, I mean, I think it could be a serious problem, and there's never really been any attempt to quantify exactly how many could be voting because the idea of even them getting driver's licenses or registering to vote in local elections is relatively new. And I think if there's some smart, enterprising, conservative activists out there, that might be something they should be looking into.
Amber Duke is the Spectator's Washington editor. She's also the author of The Snowflakes Revolt, How Woke Millennials Hijacked American Media. Amber, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
Your show keeps me alive during the week. There's nobody I'd rather listen to between 5 and 9 in the morning than you guys.
On AM 560, The Answer.
Let me ask you this. Are you not able to enjoy this summer as much as you want because of joint pain? Well, this is the best time for being outdoors, but not if your knees, shoulders, back, or hips are hurting. Hey, it's Amy Jacobson, and don't suffer any longer. Non-surgical